Hi, I'm Chloe, and the article I'm covering is called Physical Punishment, Childhood Abuse and Psychiatric Disorders. There's been very little research into physical punishment experienced in childhood and its effects in adulthood on psychopathology. Previous studies were limited in that they didn't isolate physical punishment from child abuse, they didn't contain a control group who were not physically punished or abused, they only looked at a small number of mental illnesses, and they didn't adjust for parental relationship quality. The study aimed to investigate what the authors called childhood adversity levels. Adversity level 1 was the group of adult respondents who said they were not physically punished as children, and they were the control group. The second level were respondents who said that they were physically punished but not physically or sexually abused during childhood. And the third level and highest level of adversity were those who were sexually or physically abused during childhood. The study aimed to determine if there was a correlation between the level of adversity suffered by adult respondents during their childhood and psychiatric illness during adulthood. The authors hypothesized that physical punishment as a separate measure to abuse is associated with adult psychopathology even after adjusting for socio-demographic factors and the quality of the parental relationship. The study was secondary data analytic research. It used data from the National Comorbidity Survey, or NCS, carried out in the US in the early 90s. The article states that the data was statistically significant in the US. However, the reader is left to look into the NCS data themselves. The authors state that the NCS was representative of the US population on several indicators, including age, gender, race, marital status, education, and region. The NCS scope of study states that participants were aged 15 to 54 in non-institutionalized civilian population in the US. The study does not give any further information into the participants, and I'll discuss this later in the limitations. This study used the NCS's public use data set. The data was collected in 1990 and 1992, and a structured psychiatric interview was carried out and diagnoses were based on composite international diagnostic interviews. Data on the 5,877 responses pulled from the NCS was divided into the 3 adversity levels I discussed earlier. The authors state that physical punishment was measured using the conflict tactic scales, which has been used as a measure of family violence elsewhere. Respondents were also asked how often the events occurred, and the parental bonding index was used to assess adult perceptions of maternal and paternal bonding experiences. The study factored in socio-demographic variables including education, household income, ethnicity, and marital status. The results of the study satisfied the aims, and the data supports the hypotheses that physical punishment is associated with adult psychopathology. 35.5% did not experience physical punishment or abuse in childhood, 48% were physically punished but not abused, and 16.5% were physically or sexually abused. The data showed that individuals who were physically punished but not abused had greater odds of experiencing major depression, alcohol dependence, and externalizing problems than those who were not physically punished, however to a lesser degree than those who were abused as children. The researchers, as aimed to do, were able to identify the 3 levels of childhood adversity within the available data, as I just discussed earlier. The authors concluded that future research into why parents use physical punishment is important, and it's also important to look at why those who were physically punished or abused who do not develop poor mental health, while others do, would be also important. The authors also asked that physical punishment, not just abuse, is included in the assessment of childhood adversity when researchers are looking at those sorts of things. The limitations were identified in the article matrix that I carried out, but they weren't actually anywhere near. I didn't identify probably the main one it was secondary data analysis. And while this is a valid form of analysis, a significant lack of discussion in the article around the participant specifics was very evident. In future, any study of this nature needs to go into more detail on the data used. The data from the NCS was collected in the early 90s, so it may have been old by the time 2006 rolled around. And overall, I felt the information about the participants was not transparent and decreased the study's credibility in my mind. The age of the interview tools used were also could also have been problematic by 2006. For example, the parental bonding index didn't take into account non-male, female nuclear families. And the conflict tactic scales have minor physical punish measures that may be considered by society or other people, and myself included, abuse. The limitations identified by the authors in relation to correlation not equating to causation noted that genetic factors, reverse directional relationship, a genotype that may protect against poor mental health outcomes, and recall reliability of participants and any shared environmental factors could also be the cause of the correlation. To alleviate some of the limitations, I would suggest future studies should use twin studies, preferably longitudinal, although ethically this would be difficult, especially identifying a physically abused child and following them through into adulthood without intervening. Having been physically punished as a child, I decided not to physically punish my son, and I advise that you probably shouldn't either. As the authors note though that there are many studies that place physical punishment in the same category as abuse. However, that is highly emotive and doesn't give the true picture of the risks associated with physical punishment from a loving parent. I agree with the rationale that it's important to differentiate between abuse and physical punishment and have a control group. It's very difficult to factor in other childhood adversities that people have dealt with that impact on a person's mental health later in life. And overall, the study was interesting and informative despite its limitations, but I would like to see primary longitudinal research undertaken in this field. Here are the references. That's the end. Thank you.